For more on what to expect from the NATO meetings, let's bring in Ian Bremmer, president of the Eurasia Group. Ian, always good to have you with us. You know, I'd like you to just kind of take us through this, but let me begin by asking this question. I think a lot of the time the president in his tweets and in his public statements says things that have grains of truth in them and sometimes large buckets of sand of truth in them. But in this case, what is he right about in criticizing NATO, and what is he wrong about?
He's right that the Europeans are not paying anywhere close to the 2% that was committed of GDP in their budgets back in 2014. They are moving in that direction. Some are actually paying over the 2% at this point. The United Kingdom, Poland, for example, 5 countries in all, Estonia, and of course the United States, but most are not. And the biggest economy aside from the United States, Germany in NATO, it has no plans to make that number going forward. And of course the antagonism between Trump and Merkel is probably the greatest among the allies. But you do have Trump not talking about all of the things that the Europeans are doing, the Canadians are doing, the Australians, with the United States. For example, the fact that there's enormous support for the U.S.-led war that still goes on in Afghanistan. Every single NATO ally supported the United States in fighting in that war and taking casualties. Support in terms of the fight against ISIS and the broader war on terror, which continues. And the idea that these countries somehow owe the Americans money, these are commitments that are made to NATO and to collective defense, but there's no money that's being owed directly to the U.S. The U.S. makes its contributions, meeting the 2% goal. Other countries do not or do make their contributions, but it's not a question that the Americans are somehow out of pocket and that some country has to pay America back because that they were skinflints over the past year.
I don't mean to nitpick on this, but I want to understand here. The 2% goal, if I'm understanding it correctly, has relatively little to do with NATO per se, but it reflects the amount of money that the countries have pledged to spend as a percentage of GDP on their own defense budgets. Am I right on that?
That's correct. And again, most of the NATO allies are not doing that. And given the fact that the United States has an enormous spend on its defense, almost 3.6% of the American budget is spent on defense. Now, that's all over the world, but certainly the U.S. does a lot more lifting in terms of disposition of troops, capacity for logistics. I mean, you may remember that during the war in Libya, you had troops from Europe that were stranded unless the United States was capable of getting them back because they didn't have that logistical capability themselves. So certainly many of the Europeans are consistently underspending on defense, and it's been a problem for Obama. It's been a problem for Trump.
Is there any hope, Ian, that the president can make any headway when it comes to prodding them to spend more? I mean, Donald Tusk just this morning tweeted, the U.S. doesn't have and won't have a better ally than the EU. We spend on defense much more than Russia and as much as China. I hope you have no doubt this is an investment in our security, which cannot be said with confidence about Russia or China. And then ends it with a smiley face. I mean, it really does sound like they've drawn a line in the sand and said, you know what, you can't force us to spend more. We spend plenty.
You can't force all of them to spend more.
Sure.
Merkel's in a much weaker position. Let's realize why it is they're spending more. They're spending more, number one, because Obama and Trump have been pushing them to do so. That 2014 declaration was under Obama. Since Trump has become president, they're continuing to do more. Trump deserves some credit for that. Number two, the European economies are doing well. They're all out of recession. They're all growing. There's actually more flexibility to spend more in the budget. Trump's budget as well. Increased defense spending, big tax cuts, spending on everything, right? When the economy turns bad, it's not going to be as easy. Also, Russia becoming more of a threat. Why is Estonia spending up now? Why is Poland spending up now? That was after the Russian annexation of Crimea and invasion into southeast Ukraine. So there are several reasons why the Europeans are moving towards spending more, but these are decisions taken by individual European governments. And anyone that's watched Europe over the course of the past years knows that it's like herding cats. You're not actually coordinating these guys in the same direction.
There's a needle to be threaded here, Ian, and I'm sorry to ask you for a quick answer. As he moves very quickly from the NATO meeting to a meeting next week in Helsinki with Mr. Putin, what will you be watching for as that needle gets threaded and that kind of neck snapper occurs?
Yeah, there's no needle. There's no thread. Trump's already made very clear the Putin meeting will go better. The NATO meeting will go worse. He's much more agitated coming up to NATO than he was before the G7. The NATO summit is set to be shambolic, and I am looking for all the quotes.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.